Hey, comrades, what's up? We're here to talk about Boomsday, which is Elegg and Trony's. Trony has her own story later on when she becomes a recruitable character. But for now, it's mostly Elegg. This takes place according to Shift Up before chapter 15. It's one of these there's 10 odd events that actually are very canon. So this takes place, I think, earlier than Dirty Backyard, which is more runs from last week. But which is interesting because in the campaign, I don't remember. It seems like to me that Elegg and Trony are unknown to the commander. Maybe it's more neutral how it kind of presents itself because we can, this is assuming we already know Elegg. But I think a lot of the Nikkes generally are kind of oh yeah, we kind of have a vague idea that these people exist. It's kind of the idea because they're so heavily involved. So if they exist, we are somewhat familiar with them generally. There's a few exceptions, but again, it's not always wholly consistent with the canon. But the stories are important when we get to, I don't even know, a couple events from now, and next week's too. So we're hitting a stride of a whole bunch of events that are going to be part of the main story because they introduce or talk about things that are very relevant to what's going on in the main campaign. 6-0, and the concept here is going to really deal with the power, what powers the arc, and it doesn't deal with that. That's not the main thrust of the story, but it brings it up. And then when we get to, because again, we're not playing these events in purely release order, because we're cruising through the story, and as we get parts in the story, we're going to hit up things. So obviously we have Anichiro and Graves event, which is the third anniversary. No, it was the second anniversary, which we're going to get to shortly. Which is way before a lot of these other events that we're going to talk about, because this came out in the 2025. So this came out in that year, but way earlier. Okay. Anyway, so we start with Boomsday. Elegg is reflecting on, someone is reflecting on wanting to, how they grow up. They want to see the sky. They want everyone to see the sky. Instead of achieving their dream of seeing the real sky, instead of the Dome of Eternity, which is the fake sky in the arc, that they just play video games all day. But then at some point something changed. And then even though things were changing, with us, the commander doing stuff, she was still an ancillary character. So we then pick up with Elegg doing a promotional video for Missilus. We find out that Electric Shock built a converter a while ago, which solved, quote-unquote, all the Ark's energy issues. And at first I was oh, did this take place after the campaign? Because Elegg was talking about the power in the Ark and the concerns there. But no. This takes place way before. We have that conversation. And also, let's see. Also that Trony is a master engineer, the best engineer in all the Ark, electrical engineer at least, while Elegg is really all about efficiency and streamlining things and whatnot. After the interview, she goes to visit Trony, and to see if she wants to eat, to hang out, to do anything. And Trony's just says no and keeps playing first-person shooter video games in her room, Fortnite or whatever. Then Elegg remembers about how they used to do everything together, and that she really misses that. And then she leaves. Meanwhile, in her room, Trony is talking to her little AI buddy that she created, T-Roni, right? And T-Roni's giving her a hard time about how Elegg's her best friend and she needs to treat her better and how she's looking out for her. And then she asks, the T-Roni asks Trony if she actually, when did she start playing video games and if she actually likes doing it. The next day, Elegg is working on writing a report. And again, there's no Trony. And then Ether comes by. And Ether is the most, anytime Ether shows up, some mysterious, crazy bullshit is going to happen. Because that's her modus operandi. And we haven't gotten to her. We're going to get to her Bond story. She's an SR character, not even an SSR character. And she doesn't show up in the main campaign all that much, but she's very important to the overarching story. She does show up, but she's part of the MMR, and she's deeply seated in a lot of sketchy stuff. And her and Mana are in the same squad, if I remember. Which we haven't gotten to Mana. We've seen Mana in the main campaign, but we haven't gotten to. We'll get to her Bond story, which also has a bit more of Ether being sketchy. And so she starts talking to Elegg about everything that's going on. Just oh, how's it going? How's Trony? It's she's not coming out. Oh, that's too bad. It'd be great if we could see her some more. The higher ups really want to see her some more. In fact, if they don't see her show up in the next week and they don't see her working on stuff and working on the converter, because the converter is supposed to solve the electrical crisis, but it hasn't, and there's blackouts are starting to pop up periodically around. So if she doesn't show up and fix that within the week, she's going to get mind wiped, and just let her know. And Ether is kind of ho-hum, not ho-hum, but just kind of like lighthearted way of delivering like horrifying news or sketchy stuff. Because the higher ups are telling me to tell you guys that like Trony was made to help the Ark, and she's gonna help the Ark. Like she's not gonna get a choice. Elegg then freaks out a little bit and runs to tell Trony, and she's like trying to talk to Trony, and Trony's not answering through the door. And finally, Elegg like screams and tells her everything that's going on, and then Trony's like, "Elegg, it's okay," and then she starts playing games again. Later on in our room, we wake up and we're like, oh my gosh, there's explosions. I gotta go check it out. And we run out and just see Exia and Elegg playing Boom like super loud. In fact, they're speed running it, and Exia's playing and Elegg's kind of telling her what to do. So we wait until they finish, and then Exia tells us that there's another couples event from like, if you remember her Bond story before, video game couples event where you can get like real life in-game gear or whatever. You show up to the event with a couple and do an event, and then you get like in-game gear and stuff. And we go with her to this expo, and we're like, yeah, sure. And we're like, how about you, Elegg? Are you going too? And she's like, oh no, I'm here for a totally different reason. I came to talk to you about something else. And Exie and I bumped into each other, and then we got into an argument about what's better, Doom or Final Fantasy or Final Quest. Yeah, Final Quest or Boom. And so they start arguing about it again. And then Exia like pulls out this they argue for a while. They nerd argue, like autistic loser girl argue about it for a bit. And then Exia pulls out a pamphlet about the expo, and she's like, hey, there's a Boom thing there. You should go. And then she hands it over to Elegg, and Elegg thinks about it and then leaves. And then we talked to Elegg about Trony. She hasn't left her room since like the outpost was created. So like years. At this point, like, holy cow. And Elegg needs help. There have been a lot of negative words about her, so that might be it. And because she's like the preeminent electrical engineer at all the Ark, and so that might have something to do with it. She's trying to figure out. We then mentioned that we've never met Trony, so this clearly takes place for all our campaign stuff. Anyway, Elegg wants to help get Trony out. And so we head over there to the lab. It's a huge mess. We clean up a little spot so we can sit and chat. She tells us like all these crazy things she's tried to do to like lure Trony out, like buying her gifts and all this stuff. She mentions that Trony might be depressed without calling her depressed. Just like she might just not be feeling good, or there seems to be something, she was always kind of like an introverted person who didn't like a lot of social stuff, but never like hiding herself in a dark room kind of stuff. She then talks about how she really thinks that she's going through something and she wants to help, but Trony won't let her. But she believes that eventually she'll overcome and be able to get Trony to come out again. We then encourage her and decide to go over and try to get her out. Meanwhile, T-Rony is again harassing Trony about the converter solving power outages and how it doesn't, and how she needs to figure it out or something bad's going to happen. And does she really want to get mind wiped and forget about all the fun stuff they've had and forget about the thing she saw? And then we find out that Trony is the girl from the beginning who was talking about wanting to see the sky and all that stuff. And so we go to like baby Trony or younger Trony when she's like hanging out with kids, talking about the real sky and how she wants to see it and all this stuff. I know people were giving her a hard time, but she like never gave up about her dream to like get everyone to see the real sky. And then at some point there was like an ad that was played on the Dome of Eternity, and people like lost their minds. So they saw the real sky because it was an ad about Nikke's fighting raptures, and it was for like 30 seconds or something. But people became so depressed that like it was like during this time period was like the highest rates of suicide in the Ark, because people were like had lost their minds about them they're living. They like it's like they can pretend they don't live underground and that's a horrible world and dystopian because they have the Ark, but it's like that was too much for a lot of people. And so Trony learned that like some things are better left unsaid or kept away, like that information, because people just can't mentally handle it. And that's when she decided to become a Nikke. Disaster. After becoming a Nikke, she was assigned to the electric shock and ends up with Elegg, and their mission is to solve the energy problem. So they work, they play a lot of Boom, and then Trony discovers that the problem with the energy in the Ark is not that there's not enough energy, it's that there's too much, that there's like a power supply source that is infinite amounts of power, and she ends up seeing it, right, and seeing what it is, and it, like she gets like depressed because she sees the reality. Like she barely can function. But they finish the converter, which causes less power surges, which causes because when the power surges, it can blow fuses or it can cause outages and stuff. So that's the problem solved, and that's why they use a converter to like quote unquote solve the problem. But it's the power source like never ends. It like keeps coming, and there's it's uncontrollable. So Anyway, after they solve this, Trony like sees the power source, and that's what drives her into like this deep depression, right? And Elegg hinted at the previous campaign story, or a couple of campaign stories about like the actual power source of the arc, if you remember. And it's like if you really knew, like I don't, it's a hard thing to understand, like what's really powering the arc. So they keep it a big secret. And so then she curls up in the ball and is sad, thinking about like this thing and keeping the secret and how it's like too hard and all this stuff. And she wishes she could share it with Elegg. And then Elegg knocks on the door, and then she says some stuff, and then starts over. She keeps trying to like come up with like a good plan of attack in her verbiage to get Trony to listen to her, and she keeps starting over. And then she comes over to us. She's like, "I can't do it." And then we do our special like Nikke thing where we encourage the Nikke girls and tell them everything's going to be all right and that we'll be there for them. And then they get like their bond level up. It's then they're more powerful. And so she goes back, and this time we convince her to just be honest. And so she goes and tells Trony that when they were before they both became Nikkes, when they were both kids, she's like, "Oh, I knew this girl once who wanted to see the surface and see the real sky, and she was like a light. And I was like alone and had no friends and was sad. And then I saw this girl, and she inspired me to like want to live and want to like do something with my life and be." And then I got into Boom or whatnot. And so she knew at like when she became like a squad member with it's that whole thing. When she became a squad member with this Nikke, it was like one of her heart dreams come true, because she was such a light, and she wishes that Trony would come out and be like the light for the whole arc, right, with her belief in her strength and all that stuff. And then at that point, so she's like, I want her to come back out and work on the converter with me and help give the whole arc light again. And then the power goes out where they're at, and it looks like, I got to go work on this converter. I'll be back. And she leaves, and then Trony has a conversation with T-Roni about remembering everything that, and then they literally just have she has like a recap of what Elegg just said, which is kind of funny. And then the power goes out in her room, and she decides she's going to leave. So she goes out of the room, and she sees all like the presents and stuff, that like a whole wall full of presents that Elegg has gotten her over the last year or two, or however long. And then she races off. A bit later on at the substation where like the power outage is, Elegg notices that the power coming out of the power station is immense. It's like overwhelming the converter. Like the converter's not adapting fast enough to like deal with all that power. And so she's trying to rewire it, because if it fails, it's going to affect like the whole arc, and then the Dome of Eternity will come down in the sky, and then we'll stop working. We're there with her just kind of hanging out, and we think about how the last time that happened, that caused a lot of problems. Like it was real bad. And we already know this from earlier in the event. Then Trony, and then she's like, "I'm going to go over here and do this," and Trony's like, "It's done." And it's like, Trony came out, and then Elegg like assaults her with hugs. And she's like, "Get off me," like you're smothering me. And so they work together, and we just leave them alone to kind of fix that whole problem. They fix the converter in time, but they talk about it's not a permanent solution because the infinite power will keep getting worse. And it scares Elegg, and Trony's like, "You get scared?" And Eleg's like, "Yeah, I get scared all the time." And she talks about how like the part of the reason she likes Boom so much is because Boom is like an old school game, and there's no hand holding, there's no one telling you what to do, and you have to kind of completely figure it out by yourself and learn everything and just become better on your own. And that's like real life. That's like their job, where it's like they don't know what's going on with this power, the converter and everything. They just have to keep trying things and working at it. And, playing Boom helps her believe in herself. And that's why putting Boom on every screen in the arc is like her goal in life. And even here, like when they finish the converter, they like, they reset it, and then the power comes back on, and like every screen in like the substation like is playing Boom. And like being able to do that helps her believe that she can do it, that her and Elegg can solve the arc's issues. And Trony's like, "I want you to come with me to see what's powering the arc." And so they go do that. We then skip ahead to the next day, where Exia and I are at the expo hanging out. Exia's looking super hot in another one of her fine costumes. And Elegg and Trony are there too, and Eleg's like losing her mind about this Boom limited edition package thingy. And Trony's freaking out because she can finally see the Dark Arc Ranger, or the Black Arc Ranger, which is the same one that it's like the Arc Rangers, right? It's like the thing that Drake's into as well. I think I don't know if she's into the Black Arc Ranger or she's into like the bad guy or whatever. I don't remember off the top of my head. Anyway, and so she's freaking out because she got the autograph, but it's like this is like way too much public like stuff for her like social anxiety and introvertedness and whatnot. And then we find out that Elegg, and then Trony's like, we're like, "Oh, how'd you did you guys have the day off from work? And Eleg's like, no, I told Soyeon we just weren't going to show up. And she started yelling, and I hung up and told her I'm on strike. And Chorty's like freaking out. She does her whole thing where she like writes a new entry in her will. It's like, today I died because Sayun like killed us because we went on strike. And the next thing is like, these two are crazy. Let's go play Final Quest. And so we like wish them well and head on our way. A bit later on, Elegg and Trony are out looking at like the night sky and the Dome of Eternity and talking about seeing the real sky, and how someday they hope their dream is to make it so the ark's no longer needed, so everyone can leave. And then Eleg's like, and that's like so everyone can see the sky, right? Which is like Trony's dream, and that works for Elegg too, because then once everyone's gone, she can finally play Boom on like the Dome of Eternity, because no one's here to like complain or kill themselves because it's not the real sky. And so at the end of the day, they have the same goal, and that's to get everybody out of the ark and living on the surface and stuff. And then they talk about like the power source in the ark and how they can't control it. And so they're going to keep working until we can all retake the surface. And they get ready to do everything they can, which ends which ends Boomsday, the event. So we follow up with Elegg's Bond story, which immediately takes place after Boomsday. So we're hanging out. We go to Cafe Sweetie, so we get a cup of coffee. We're going to buy sugar, and she really wants to give us coffee, but she can't figure out the coffee machine because Boom's installed on the display screen, right? And so it's like, Elegg, we'll go track her down and get her to come fix this problem. So we're searching around. We find that she's installed Boom on like everything, on Yan's calculator, on the billboard at AZX, the hotel, the park, the toy store. It's causing us problems. And eventually, like, okay, let's go to our room. So we head to our room, and we find her laid out on the couch there with Boom on our TV, and we chat with her about like what's going on, and she's like, oh good, you followed my trail. And we're like, hey, Boom's cool and all, but you gotta like allow people to do their jobs and stuff. And she's like, I had to go a little bit overboard, but it's easy, you just gotta uninstall it. And then he's like, no one knows how to do that. And she's like, okay, fine. So we follow her around as she goes and uninstalls Boom from all this stuff around the outpost, and then she's like, let's hang out. That's the real reason I did all this stuff. And we're like, don't you have work? And she's like, nope, I'm on strike. And so we continue to uninstall Boom from around the outpost, eventually getting to the observatory where Boom's installed everywhere. And then we're like thinking about how she had installed Boom on our observation device on the surface. And then at that point, I'm like, in real life, I'm thinking, oh, okay, so this doesn't take place right after Boomsday. This takes place right after. The Bond story takes place much later, because according to Shift Up, in their official timeline, Boomsday takes place around chapter 15, and then of the main story, and then after chapter 30 after we rescue her in chapter 30 is when this happens, because that's when she was on the surface and she installed it on her observation device. Okay, so the Bond story happens much later. And then we talk about how with her that even though she does have limits, it seems like she'll just install Boom on anything, but she's never done it like on a heart monitor or the Dome of Eternity. And so we make like some commentary about that. And while we're talking about that, she installs it on her phone, and then she talks about installing it on the billboard at the shopping mall. And we're like, no, just install everything. So she uninstalls it from the observatory. And then she's like, all right, I want to go to the park because that's the last place where we haven't uninstalled yet, and then we can have some fun. After taking care of the park, we decide we're going to take Elegg to some place where it has like no screens. And so we take her to the Made For You cafe, and we get there, and then we get attended to by Aid, and we order some fluffy egg fried rice. And then Elegg's like, I don't know, this stuff seems kind of boring. I want something more energetic and gory. And so they bring the menu out, and it's got a whole bunch of like crazy things like kaboom, explosion, omni-rice, and static shock melon soda. And she gets super excited and orders a whole bunch of stuff. And she just, nonstop verbal diarrheas at us about Boom, about electricity, about all this kind of crazy stuff that she's super into. And then we finish up the meal. And as we get escorted out by Coco and Aid, or Ade or whatever, and she's so excited. She's like, wow, that was super fun. It was great getting our every need catered to, and it was so fun that I almost forgot to install Boom on something, but I found something. And then we go like, meanwhile, Soda's like freaking out and is like, Coco, come look at this. And she takes her over to Cocorella, which is her like umbrella that she uses as her weapon. And there's Boom installed on it. And they're like, what are we supposed to do with this? Next up, and having failed to stop Elegg from installing Boom at the Made For You cafe, we decide we're going to go take her to someone who knows a lot of stuff about machinery as well. So electricity and machinery, right? And so we head over to the power station, which is where Maxwell hangs out, right? And so we get there, and Eleg's like, "Oh yeah, I come over and help work on some stuff and do electricity stuff all the time." And I love popping in and installing Boom on stuff. And so we get there, and then she tries to install Boom on some devices. She's like, "Hey, it's not working." And then Maxwell pops up, and she's like, "Ta-da! Last time you were here, you installed Boom on everything." And so I upped the security, and now it is impossible for you to install Boom. And so they get into like a little fracas about that, like. And then they decide they're going to make a wager. And so Maxwell says, if you can hack your way through all the security system measures within 30 minutes and install Boom, then I will allow you to install Boom on every device in the station. Otherwise, you have to never install Boom on anything here ever again, including watches and phones. And she's like, "Oh yeah, let's do it." So the hacking battle begins, and there's 3 layers of security that Eleg's going to work her way through, and we're going to monitor, and then Maxwell decides she's going to stay out and then jump in at some point, and then they can like hack battle off. So Elegg goes, and she goes super fast, and she breaks through the first layer pretty quick. I think in like 5 minutes, it said. And then Maxwell's like, "All right, I got to hop in." And so then they start battling, and the progress bar remains at like 50% for about 15 minutes. And then she breaks through that security system, and there's only 8 minutes left, and Maxwell's pretty certain that she will not have the time to clear through the last layer, which is the strongest or whatever. Elegg continues, and they type, and we observe that Elegg's like super fast, moving at speeds that we can't even like track of. While Maxwell is much slower, but like very concise in like fending off like hacking attempts. And then with only a minute left, we still have 90% of the install bar there's only 90% in the install bar, and Maxwell gets super confident. But then all the power goes out, and when the power kicks back on, Boom's installed, and there's like 0.1 seconds remaining. Maxwell's like, wah, 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 I guess I lose. So now Elegg can install Boom, and Maxwell will play it with her. And they talk about how Elegg actually is the one who built the software. I think she built the software that the whole thing's built upon, so she was able to like hardwire herself like straight into it. And so as Elegg's like getting Boom set up for all 3 of us to play co-op for the whole night, Maxwell's like, "Well, this is a good time to like readjust and get brand new software or replace the hardware at least." Anyway, so despite that, we all play and have a good time, play the whole night, and then wake up. And then early in the morning, we're like super tuckered out. And then Eleg's like super jazzed. She's like, "All right, that's enough Boom for this month. I got to get back to work." And so she gets off to the lab to play, and she thinks about how like the strike's over, but there'll be another strike someday. Because when she asks for time off, Sayun always denies it. So this is why she goes on strike, so she can get like a day off. And that, though she likes her job and she likes doing what she's doing, that Boom is her passion, and then her ultimate dream is to continue. Her ultimate dream that she pushes for is to be able to install Boom on every device known to mankind. Like crazy. Anyway, so go ahead. That wraps up her bond stories. Go ahead, like, share, subscribe, comment, and I'll catch you guys later. Bye.